I've done a lot of these.
And we are live. So we had I had a bunch of Christians on my channel over the past few months, and I got a lot of emails and I got a lot of letters. Yeah, I get a lot of mail and phone calls even. And they all said the same thing. They said, these Christians are all morons. They don't know anything about the Bible. These Christians all suck. Get us somebody who knows something about the Bible. So I contacted this guy, John Depue, and he's rumored to be a really important biblical scholar. And then I had him on the show, and they're like, well, that guy talked about was rock and roll. Get his wife. So I was like, all right, fine. I'll add his wife to the stream. So now we finally have somebody, a Christian who knows something, rumored to know something about the Bible. Welcome, please, John and Laura.
Hi, guys. Nice to meet everyone. Hello.
Hey, Tripologist is already here. What's up, Tri? So, Laura, you want to introduce yourself to the channel? Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Laura Robinson. I'm a PhD candidate at Duke University. I'm on the grad school side of things. We have a divinity school. I teach there, but my degree is not through them. So I focus more on like the historical side of religious studies, studying texts as historical documents. I am working on my dissertation right now. It's on the Gospel of Matthew. Looking at the role of missionaries in the Gospel of Matthew and how Matthew envisioned the missionary project. But I also just work widely at New Testament studies. I have an article coming out pretty soon on Paul and on how Paul might have interacted with the Roman Empire in his letters. And then of course, like my popular face on the internet is that I co-host a New Testament review.
Right, New Testament podcast.
Yeah. New Testament Review is a podcast I do with Ian Mills, who is also a PhD candidate at Duke. And we just talk about academic articles that have been very influential in our field, and just try to make them accessible to people who might not know that much about the New Testament. We started the show for students, basically for other PhD students who were trying to get through a lot of material before exams. But then it kind of turned into a thing with a life of its own. So a lot of people listen to the show now who aren't in the academy at all, and we're really excited about that. So
yeah, it's cool. I've watched a couple of streams. It's good. It's a good podcast.
Yeah, now we have a YouTube side. Yeah, so yeah.
And John, you were here 2 weeks ago, but you could just give us a brief synopsis of who you are and if you've changed since then and how you've developed since you were last on the show.
Sure. No. Yeah, I haven't been fired from my job yet. So for being on YouTube too much. But yeah, so I'm John. I direct the faith formation program at a little church in Cary, North Carolina. It's a little United Church of Christ church. Been doing that for a little over 3 years. I'm a graduate of Duke Divinity School. Graduated back in 2016. I've been in Durham, North Carolina for about 7 years now. I'm originally from Iowa, where I did my bachelor's degree in philosophy and religious studies. So yeah, that's kind of me. I play in a couple of bands. I love baseball. We have a cat.
You guys have a cat? You didn't tell me.
You have a cat around here somewhere. So.
Kind of.
Oh, that's right. That's actually why you have to stream in different rooms.
Why we're in different rooms.
We have a cat too, but it's honestly the sweetest cat in the history of the world. I swear it's the sweetest thing that ever lived. We had a male cat a while back who was also really nice, but you could get into quarrels with him. Like he'd every once in a while pick a fight with you, like 3 a.m. He'd go like, "Ran," try to wake you up. This cat never had her for a year and a half. I've never fought with her once. She's the sweetest pie. Now, before we'll open up to it, we'll just have a general chat. But first, I want to get a little background on Laura. So, how long have you've been on relatively recent to Twitter and YouTube, right? Or at least as I haven't noticed you until about 5 months ago or so.
So the New Testament Review started as a podcast, just because that's what my doctoral advisor, Mark Goodacre, he has a New Testament show called the NT Pod. That's terrific. And we were really inspired by him. And we didn't really start talking about making the jump to YouTube until fairly recently. I mean, I've been on Twitter for years. It's a terrible habit, but we made
But you
yeah. No,
okay. So you're not new. You're just new to like this little community of
kind of blew
atheists
up really quickly. Basically the reason why we ended up in the YouTube world at all was because we did that Lee Strobel show for April 1st podcast. Which was, it started as a joke and then we ended up doing seriously, and it turned into our most popular show ever, which is so disheartening. We reviewed so many wonderful books, but no, people got really interested in it, and I think it makes sense because I think it's the book that we've talked about on the show that most people have some kind of preconception of. But people got interested in it. We've been doing some, appearances here and there, and we've talked about, we're basically the next phase for the New Testament review is we're trying to produce more of our own content on YouTube, just to talk about stuff other than articles. So we're starting the non-canonical Bible study in 2 weeks. We're going to look at famous books in early Christian, early Jewish literature that didn't make it into the Bible, basically. So we're going to talk about what they are, what they talk about, where they came from, whether or not there was any history of a chance they might make it into the Bible. So just fleshing that out, basically. So.
Wasn't it, I might be wrong about this, but isn't the Lee Strobel book like wildly successful? Isn't it like a huge? Because I've never really, I checked it out a tiny bit. I took it out of the library on an app, and I just looked at it briefly, barely skimmed it. I mean, I didn't read it or anything, but I got it's like, what surprised me once was the Purpose-Driven Life guy. That he had a book, The Purpose-Driven Life. I forget his actual name, but that book is that is the best-selling nonfiction book of all time. And I was like,
really?
What? Yeah. Even my mom has a copy of that.
Yeah.
But so I don't know, for whatever reason, I guess that connected with an audience, and that's probably why your podcast kind of connected with an audience. And then you streamed on Pine Creek Doug, and I think that's the first time I saw you.
That was where it started. I actually started on Help Me Believe with Hayden, and then that kind of got picked up by people. So
Now, Hayden, you guys actually know outside of YouTube, or you're friends with just from YouTube?
We've actually just gotten to know him during the pandemic, actually.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
This is actually a baby blanket for his daughter. We just are buddies. So, yeah. Now,
what's your background? You've been Christian your whole life, but different. You've morphed over the years. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely a theological mind. I was born into a Quaker family. Actually, I was raised Quaker. It was sort of a small, basically like from an agricultural community out in Indiana. Went to a small Quaker church for probably until I was in my early teens, and then
actually, before I let you finish, there's a lot of people don't know this, but there's a big Quaker influence in Philadelphia. And that's fairly close to Indiana. My sister, when she had her first child, we weren't Christian at all at this point. I was raised pretty much secular. My sister was totally secular. But when she had her first child, she was thinking that she wanted to raise them in a religious tradition, because she had some idea like that would probably be good for my kid. So she went looking around, and she like went to a couple of Judaism things, and then she went to Quakers, and that was the thing she almost settled on, raising them in Quaker, because there's kind of a like brotherhood of man. That's where
there's a lot of different stripes.
It's like the Philadelphia means like city, like Phila is blood. Like there's a whole history of like, there's a lot of people think it's like associated with like peaceful and like liberal values, and not necessarily liberal politically, but in the broader sense.
Historically, it's a pacifist faith. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So you were raised as that until.
So we were from a Quaker church that was basically Christian evangelical Quaker. There are some Quakers who don't really follow traditional Christian doctrine in a lot of ways, but this one did. So we were basically like evangelical Quakers. And then when my parents when I was probably 11 or 12, my parents got involved in the evangelical community in my hometown. We'd been going to church with my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. So this was closer to home. They got involved in sort of like a revivalist community, basically. So suddenly we kind of got, as young teens, thrown into the deep end of the pool as far as,
So that's like kind of fundamentalist. What denomination? Is it like
like non-denom, like non-denom big evangelical, basically. So
I mean, I guess that's kind of what I am, but I don't. Yeah. I think this is a more intense strain of it, right?
Yeah. As with everything, there's there's elements of the monoculture, and then there's very specific localized elements.
Right.
So, and also things have probably changed in that world since I was in it. And also the youth side, you're getting such a different package. That was. A lot of that was, in like 2003, 2004. That would have been
a lot of it's also Southern California, like Southern California.
I'm sure. Yeah. Whereas Indiana,
like my wife thinks that she's like a red state conservative, and she kind of is for Southern California. Right. Like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I don't think people be like, "What? Who's that liberal Democrat?"
Right.
And she doesn't really notice it. Like I catch her being like, all the time, like with what was there was that one program that was really left wing that people were upset about that my wife really liked because she got medicine for her mother, and I didn't say it, but I was like, that's a liberal program, Jen.
Yeah.
But okay, so it's pretty intense. What I'm trying to get at, it's pretty fairly intense and somewhat fundamentalist. Or totally fundamentalist.
Yeah, I mean, conservative evangelical, basically. I mean, one of the big influences, too, was just, there was actually a lot of money in this community. So it was a lot of, because it was the suburbs of Indiana. So a lot of white collar folks, and so that was kind of where I sort of came of age.
Is it considered part of the Christian right? Were you part of the Christian right? Like a conservative Christian?
Yeah,
because you made a joke on. You remember you made your joke about Jerry Falwell?
Yeah,
I didn't get it.
Okay,
I had no idea what you were talking about. Yeah. Like something about like this is I guess a guidebook for wives. I mean, I could piece it together.
That was part of the whole Christian biblical manhood and womanhood thing.
Right.
Which was everywhere when I was a kid or teenager, at least. Yeah. I mean, I think I don't think the churches I spent time in high school, college, I don't think you'd see a lot of there's more than one kind of Christian right? There's like people who have big cardboard cubes hanging off the back of their pickup trucks, but then there's also just this sort of American suburban conservatism that sort of like hinges on like a very strong sense of the nuclear family is ordered by like an authoritative man, and that sort of submission oriented model of marriage. That was definitely a lot of it.
It's definitely a huge boogeyman with because where I come from is the suburb of New York City, Westchester.
Right.
And I didn't know a Republican growing up. Not only not a Christian. I mean, there were people who were nominally Catholic or nominally Protestant, but I didn't meet an evangelical till I was 20 years old. And that's like verboten. A lot of people don't know that I'm a Christian, but they immediately associate it with like, oh, you're Jerry Falwell. You're in the moral majority now. That's what they immediately associate it with.
Yeah,
so somewhere along the way, though, what happened? You didn't quite. You shifted somehow.
Yeah,
but you were into it, right? You were a pretty religious person at this point, or no?
I mean, I thought there's never been a time in my life where I wouldn't describe myself as very religious, to be honest. Okay. So starting at a very early age, it's always hard when you're thinking about like your own biography, basically. But I mean, I think definitely there was always a level of discomfort with the sort of, conservative suburban Christianity side of things. Because very early on, just the idea that women couldn't be pastors just didn't make any sense to me.
Oh, that was still a thing when the church said okay.
Oh yeah, no, this was like the validity of a church stood or fell on whether or not a woman could be a pastor. That's like, if you have a woman who's a pastor.
Absolutely. Oh wow, yeah. See, that's what I'm saying. That's way hardcore.
Yeah, that's really funny because I don't hear that. I'm like, oh, you know, like typical evangelicals, right? But I wonder how much of that is a cultural thing. Because for me, it's just so normal. Like this was just so much of it when I was a kid. But yeah, no, the idea that women couldn't be pastors was, you know, kind of a given. I remember it was kind of complicated for my mother because my mother was a doctor, you know, so Quakers have a very strong education tradition for women in particular, right. And have a very egalitarian attitude. And, you know, we go to this church and then suddenly the Bible study is at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning, which sends a very strong message about where the church thinks women should be at 10:30 on Tuesday mornings, right? You know, that right. You're not going to be at work, you're going to be at home homeschooling your children, and you know, so
you're going to be at home baking cakes and
right. Yeah, I think there's always that tension there with our family that on one hand we were this very egalitarian family, but then we were kind of trying to force ourselves into this community that really didn't fit with anything we'd been doing for the last 10 years.
Right, but were you weren't trying to force yourself in because you thought it was in keeping with Jesus necessarily. You were trying to force yourself in culturally, right?
Right. Like I was very, I had a really strong sense of the idea that I was like messing up, basically, that, you know, by virtue of, you know, going and trying to get a job in this. And I think that's why I ended up studying the Bible, because it couldn't be right. It couldn't be right that my job was to fit with this model of what a Christian was supposed to be like. You know, that it just didn't make sense. Like I just knew I was never going to be this kind of, you know, mom in a father knows best kind of household homeschooling kids, you know.
Right, totally.
I just knew that wasn't going to happen for me. Well, so a big part of why I went on to get my master's after IU was just to kind of start resolving some of this stuff in my own life. You know, like I gotta make sense of this. I gotta figure out how to.
Right. So in a sense, it was a deconstruction, like they talk about. You know, but I think you don't like the word, but I've heard that word used.
Right.
Not everybody who deconstructs. There's a guy who interviewed Paul Gia who calls himself an ex-evangelical, who's still a Christian. He just doesn't believe, you know, that the earth is 6,000. He was raised as a young earth creationist. He's still a Christian, but he believes like in evolution now, I think, and believes that doesn't believe the earth is 6,000 years old. So he had to like deconstruct from certain things that they considered core to Christianity, which I'm pretty sure you don't and John doesn't.
Right.
Right.
Well, and that's part of what makes this so hard is a lot of these churches get a lot of staying power by, you know, I think the thing that blew my mind when I went to go get my first master's at Wheaton College was just the insane breadth of beliefs that were represented among Christians.
Right.
You know, like I just didn't know that was a thing because, you know, when you go to these, you know, more traditionalist churches, there's a lot of insistence on conformity. And if people, you know, and the in-group, out-group is not, you know, here we all believe all these different things and this is great. It's that, you know, there are those false Christians out there who believe these things, but you got to watch out for them and you have to learn why they're wrong and you have to stay away from them versus us who have it right. And also, you know, a lot of this comes down to basically, you know, like if you leave this kind of church, then you leave Christianity altogether. You know, there's no.
Well, there's to be fair to the people who are saying that, they do see that happening. Like, you know, so it's not totally out to lunch and it's not totally from left field. They do see people go through a journey where they start out, like a lot of atheists had a middle period where they tried to be like, I don't even know who she is. I only vaguely know who she is, like a Rachel Held Evans. What's the other one? Jen Hatmaker, Christian.
Right.
I think they're similar. They're both kind of liberal, I guess.
It definitely does happen. It does happen that some people like enter a more exploratory phase of their faith that doesn't end with them being Christians.
Right.
But you know, I guess the thing that concerns me is you can make that exploratory period a lot faster and just kick people right out the door. If you
you shouldn't be exploring. Okay, I'm done.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one thing that just concerns me. So
before I keep asking you, John, you haven't spoke. I mean, I'm sort of getting a lot of information from her, but if you have something you want to say, just to.
Oh yeah, I actually have one thing because I was looking at the chat a bit, and Spartan theology.
This is the point. Just for marriage advice, you go. I love you, dear. You're doing great.
Good job, Laura.
Yeah. I'm a marriage expert. DM me whenever you want marriage. I'm a marriage expert.
Yeah, so I was looking at something Spartan Theology said, and he asked if we had ever read Jesus and John Wayne. And I told him that Laura is currently reading that book. So I don't know if you want to comment on that in relationship to... It's very, very relevant to what you've been talking about in terms of your own journey. Yeah. If you could explain what that is. And then
it's by Kristen Cobes Demez, who's a professor at Calvin. And it's Jesus and John Wayne is the name of the book. And it's basically a history of Christianity in the United States and constructing this ideal of Christian practice for men that's really tangentially related to Jesus and basically more fixated on the idea of like cultivating the
manly man
patriarch is like this ideal. So like John Wayne kind of taking over the Jesus image is the thing people describe.
Right.
Basically. So
yeah. So it's about there's obviously that starts such a complicated topic. But so where were we on your I
was talking about going to my master's and just, like finding that breadth of belief in my first master's was really incredible. So I think that, Wheaton College is where I kind of started to realize what I believed in, what I wanted to follow. And, it's from there, I've still changed considerably since then, just meeting people with different perspectives. I think the biggest influence of my life at Duke has been meeting Jewish scholars and working alongside them and realizing, how Jewish people read their scriptures and how this should relate to the way we read ours. And, but yeah, I think I think the biggest theological change in my life has been, I'm going to do a little sidebar. Sorry, I'm trying not to monologue, but the best example I have for this is, sorry?
It's fine. You can monologue.
Okay. So the best
everything you're saying is relevant to what we're talking about. So
Perfect.
Feel free to monologue.
Yeah, no, good. So the best example I have for this is when I was getting my master's, my sister moved to Memphis to start work as a school teacher. And the first time we went to Memphis, this was, the first time we'd been outside of like our little college towns in Indiana. And we were just like right in the middle of this big city that can be quite violent and, has a pretty significant crime rate. So my sister moves in right smack dab in the heart of Memphis. And when we were trying to first visit there, it was like everywhere we're always trying to like control everything, right? We're trying to go somewhere, but we have to go 3 blocks away and we don't know if those blocks are safe. So we're going to get a cab and we're going to do this. And, you're kind of constantly like looking around, making sure you're not going to make a false move. But then as we got more comfortable in Memphis, we realized that was ridiculous, that you could walk through those 3 blocks and nothing would happen. And so I think
that's like, okay, I'll give you the perfect story to illustrate what you're talking about. I grew up outside New York City. Yeah. There are people in the suburbs, like I grew up in the suburbs, but I've been in, I had friends who lived in like Brooklyn and Manhattan, and I'd go stay at their apartment for like 5 days at a time. So I've always been in and out of the city and never thought about it. But there are people who are kind of like Hicks who live in the suburb who have said to me, you went in the city the other day and like, do you go on the subway? Like, can you do that? I'm like, and you feel like a badass for like doing nothing. I'm like, yeah, of course I do, man. It's so, but that's the when that actually happened to me because I used to read the Daily News. I'd wake up and read the local New York paper, and you get this warped view of just how dangerous the world actually is because all you're reading about is shooting and stabbings and like. So you think it's 100 times more dangerous than it is.
Yeah, so then you're constantly obsessed with that. So I think this is the way suburban Hicks deal with cities is the perfect metaphor for how conservative evangelicals deal with theology. That there is this constant, we can't go down that road, something terrible.
Oh, wow. That's a really good point. Yeah.
there's this constant anxiety. And the thing is, and also there's a lot of people who push that fear, like, well, if you start down there, you just don't know what's going to happen. But actually, once you start going into the city and you start seeing it's a very nice place, you realize it's not that scary at all. So I think that's been the biggest transformation in my life, is realizing that, there's no such thing as a dangerous idea that I can't engage with, or there's no thing I'm going to learn that's going to make God stop loving me.
Actually, okay, let me just back what you're saying, because I wasn't raised Christian, and that's really, I didn't become a Christian until I was 29. So I can't, even if I wanted to, I can't internalize any of those like sacred cows. Like, you can't believe this, or this is going to happen. I totally understand what you mean. Yeah. I can't do it at all. I don't even know what they are.
That's a superpower.
Right. You have to be raised to actually freak out about them, And I remember I was listening to a guy who I respected, and he starts going, this idea is dangerous. And I had this like, dangerous? What on earth are you talking about? Right. That's a weird way to think about an idea, dude. I didn't say it because I got it that he was Christian and that's what he thought. But it's a warped way of thinking. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just to echo what you said, Craig, I do think it has a lot to do with converting as an adult, as against being sort of raised in a certain kind of Christianity. Because I never had that struggle either. And I think you're probably onto something with that it really does have to do with either being raised in that context and then everything else.
Well, because somebody tells you, probably what happens with Laura is you don't even notice that it gets planted in you, but somebody probably told you 50 times when you were 14, you have to believe Adam and Eve are literally human beings because that's the first step to heathenism. Yeah. Somebody said that to you 50 times and you believed it somewhere, it processed it. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a part of it. So go ahead, Laura. Or John.
No, that's exactly how it happened. So I guess, if I just have a message for Christians watching this today, it's,
wake up, grow up.
Yeah.
Get real.
Go to theology expecting to have a great time. Don't do this weird white person thing where you go in and you're scared of it. Like, don't do the white person in Memphis thing. That I've been there and it wasn't fun. So that's.
Have you guys been to New York City? Did I ask you this, John, already?
I have been once, and it was for music stuff. I played at a tiny venue. I'm forgetting where it was exactly. It was kind of a blur because we drove.
Wasn't the Knitting Factory? It wasn't was it a tiny cool place or a tiny well-known place?
It's not a well-known place. It had so one space was specifically for midnight music, and they would go from midnight to 2 a.m. and they would just have music in that room. And then connected to it was just a tiny little bar. So generally the musicians would be waiting in that tiny little bar and then go over and play. So there would be local music, just straight from 12 to 2.
They'd probably be fantastic. It was my guess.
Yeah, it was really fun, but I don't remember much of it because I was so tired. Because we played at 5:30 in where was it? Pittsburgh, PA.
Pittsburgh, that's a place. Could have been.
It was a midnight show.
And so we played a concert there, and then just drove straight from there.
Oh wow! So you were an actual traveling band.
So it was a little tour that we were doing in the summer back in, I think it was 2018. So that was the only time I've ever been in New York City, and it was very brief because we left right after that to go to.
So did you actually do a little circuit thing as a band where you go to different towns and play? So we always talked about doing it, but we never got around to it. We played local bars in the area, but never went.
Yeah, we do the local stuff quite a bit, but we have done 2 smaller kind of tour runs.
You were out in Indianapolis a year ago.
Yeah, we did kind of a Midwest one. Kind of. We didn't go too far. We didn't go to Iowa or anything. And
it's pretty far.
I know it is, but so we've done the sort of a little Midwest run and then a little kind of Northeast run. But that's about it.
Got it. So now, Laura, getting back to you, the one thing that you didn't do, which a lot of people who deconstruct do, or I don't hear that you've done it, is you didn't question your faith at all in any of this. You didn't go, do I really believe in God? Was there any point where that happened?
I got close the first year.
See?
Of my
See? Like it doesn't. It's no big deal. You can believe anything, and then you got close. See?
Well, but I will say that I think a period of doubt, even extreme doubt, is more. I think it happens to more people than it doesn't, to be honest. I think we kind of need to normalize this whole I don't even know if there's a God phase in Christians' lives. It's like being a Christian teenager. I think it happens to most people, to be honest.
It could very easily. I don't. There are a lot of people. The one thing that some atheists perceive that's accurate is there are a lot of people who don't actually believe what they believe. Like deep down inside, they're going through the motions and they kind of sort of believe in God, but they don't really believe, and they've never really looked at it, and they don't really want to.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a part of it.
Yeah.
It's different. Yeah. I mean that could happen, but why didn't it happen? Did you have experiences that were spiritual when you were younger or something? Is there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the thing that almost, I don't know. Sometimes it's always hard not to overblow this stuff because you don't want to say that it's trivializing the experience of people who actually don't believe, to say something like, oh, I was an atheist for a while. No, I'm not going to say that. But I think that for me, a huge motivation of getting my master's in Wheaton on studying the Bible was this idea that I was going to be able to figure everything out, that I was going to have these answers, especially because a lot of my friends and a lot of my family were leaving the faith around that time. And
they were. Okay.
Yeah. And I really thought the part of why I wanted to do this was so I'd be able to answer all their questions. And then you go to grad school and you realize that's not what grad school's for. And you have way more questions than you think you're going to. So I think the first year of my grad program, I would definitely say had kind of this sense of, maybe they're onto something.
Are you there, God? It's me. Are you there, God? It's me.
Yeah.
Laura.
The sense of maybe people are onto something. I remember really clearly this one night of we'd been learning in class about how much of the context of the Bible we miss when we don't know the historical background, and just how much reading the stuff out of its historical context you just lose. And I remember reading my Bible that night for my devotions, and just feeling like I was just staring into a pool of water, just nothing was coming back. I just had this overwhelming sense of just there was nothing there. And I think that I think for me that was the beginning of my break with kind of this certainty-based Christianity. The idea that Christianity was about knowing the answers to a bunch of different questions about God and Jesus and being able to explain them primarily to yourself and then to other people, right? And I kind of started to get a lot more interested in, okay, if this isn't the way to be a Christian, then what else is out there? So that's about the time I would say I got really into liturgy. I got really fascinated by the sacraments. I read a lot of novels by Christians. I read a lot of Marilyn Robinson at that time, and just kind
Marilyn Robinson is that's that kind of new agey Christian girl. Is that the prayer thing? Something about
Marilyn Robinson?
Marilyn Robinson's a Calvinist, right?
Yeah, she's an Iowa Calvinist. She
in a Bardian,
I might be thinking of the one who ran for president. Who's the one who ran?
Oh, that's Williamson.
Marianna Williamson. Yes, I was thinking of her. Yeah.
That would be hilarious.
Yeah, she's a Calvinist. I'm like, no, guys, she ain't no Calvinist, guys.
No, Marilyn Robinson is a Nobel Prize winning author who
did not run for president. Yeah. Although that would have been sweet, but
she would never run for president. But no, she so she was sort of a her sort of storytelling just, yeah, I think it just kind of like broadened my range of what it meant to be a Christian and how to think through this stuff. That, you know, there's a lot to Christianity besides like agreeing with a series of sentences, right? You know,
right.
like,
So you were trying to go deeper and be more spiritual and comprehensive.
Yeah.
And more not necessarily emotional, but attached to something. Like that's probably what I did before I became a Christian, to tell you the truth, because that's kind of a natural. There was a period where I would have said I was looking for God pretty intently when I was in my 20s, and I read everything under the sun, and you know, some things spoke to me and some things didn't. So that would have been, and the things that spoke to me did happen to almost always be, you know, if you start digging into poetry and art, you start finding there's not necessarily doctrinal Christianity, but there's a lot of God belief in there, you know. Yeah. Always, constantly. And that's one thing I started to notice, like even in Shakespeare and stuff like that. Go ahead. I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I mean, that's basically it. Yeah. That, and basically meeting, that summer I did an internship, in Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And I just met a lot of people who, I felt like really knew who Jesus was personally. Like I met a lot of people who knew Jesus as a person who was very present in their lives, and that didn't have that much to do with being able to answer a lot of questions about why God does this and not that, or why, you know, and I think that was kind of modeling for me how to hold these things in tension, you know, that you can have a lot of uncertainty and clarity and exploration in your study life, but that doesn't mean that your spiritual life consists exclusively of those things. And there's a lot of worship and participation in the faith and in the community that can happen apart from that. And I think that's basically where I've been ever since, honestly. You know, that's.
So you saw people who you thought were convincingly Christ-like in their behavior. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And you were like, I'm with those people. I want to be like that. That's real to me.
Yeah, they were crushing it. I just wanted to be more like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the answer that, you know, when Ian Mills was in Pine Creek's interview, he gave an answer that I thought was great. I know I brought this up with John, but it's amazing what he meant by his answer and what Pine Creek heard, because they were so different. He goes, I want to be a Christian. Pine Creek goes, oh, cool. Yeah. And he's like, oh, he lights up like a Christmas tree because I got him. And he thinks he thinks what Pine Creek thinks he said was, you know, I know it's fake. You know it's fake. Yeah. I just want to believe and fake myself. Wink, wink. We both know it's fake. Yeah. And what he actually said, and he literally spelled it out, he said, there's something about Jesus and the person of Jesus that inspires me to be self-sacrificing love and live a life of commitment to others that I would not do by myself. Yeah. I would not do without Christianity. And I was like, bang, that's it. That's a great answer. So I think that's kind of what you said in a different way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. There's a level of community, and I mean, because I think a lot of times I try really hard not to make it too utilitarian, you know, of just like, oh, yeah, well, you get this community because you're like, you know, you can go to a Star Trek convention and get that too. Yeah. Like there is no substitute for religious experience. Like there is no substitute for it. It's the only thing that is like it. Like having some kind of and not even experience, but like religious worship and religious practice. It's a sort of, you know, divine, permanent consciousness. You know, that there's nothing else like it. You know, like what else are you gonna find that's like that? So
right, but you weren't the part of the other thing about what you said, that because I came to Christianity way late. Yeah. I don't really care about the arguments. I care about them as intellectual puzzles, because some of them are interesting.
They can be fun. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I don't care about them in terms of I need to prove some Christians are trying to prove this stuff to themselves when they start down that path. Yeah. And that's probably why they get iced, because some of the apologetics don't quite work, guys.
Well,
pretty sure most of them don't.
Well, a chunk of them don't. Well, I wouldn't say most. Dry apologists is working on some that are going to be successful, right? Dry apologists is still there. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
No, and I agree with that. I mean, we talked about this last time too, that neither of us are really interested in sort of persuading people to kind of adopt the Christian faith. And part of the reason is because I just don't think the arguments work, and they're fairly easily, from a philosophical perspective, sort of essentially destroyed. And so that's partly why I don't go that direction in terms of how I'm actually engaging with people who are non-Christians. But I know that you probably don't agree with that exactly, but that's kind of where I'm coming from with this, is I see them sort of constantly being deconstructed from atheist and agnostic positions. And I kind of agree with a lot of the atheist and agnostic responses to a lot of apologetics.
Well, it definitely depends on which ones you're talking about. It's true up to a point, and then there's a lot of stuff that atheist counter-apologetic. I mean, I don't want to go into this, but I talk about this in my videos all the time, because there's a lot of side issues that atheists are really good at, reiterating, that have nothing to do with whether God exists or not. Like, violence in the Old Testament. There's a whole bunch of counter-apologetics that are just basically pointless or irrelevant to believing in God. They seem relevant, but they're not. But anyways, so how does Laura, you want to comment?
Yeah, sorry, I had to mess with the lighting because the sun's going down here. I think this is something that's important to talk about as Christians. And this is kind of my whole thing with the whole why I don't think it's important to argue that we can discover the resurrection with the tools of history, is I think we get in a trap of acting as though the doctrinal backbone of Christianity is kind of the whole thing, or this sort of puzzle box that is like a mystery we can solve, right? Like, why should you be a Christian? Well, it's because we can find out that this thing happened 2,000 years ago. Okay, it did. Okay, now you're a Christian. And that's just not what being a Christian is. Like, it's not initialing next to a bunch of statements that you found sufficient reasons. Right,
but those a lot of that stuff was in response to challenges. That stuff is still in its infancy. That's partially why it's not that successful. Like, some of the theological arguments are better than others. But most of why they even use evidentialism is because that's where the challenge came from. Yeah. And the challenge came from the secular people saying, you got no evidence. So they try, it's a reactionary response.
Yeah, totally. The question that I would have is, like, why step into the rules of that game? Yeah. Like, what? Well, if this is something that's being introduced by, and a lot of this stuff does come from sort of like, quote unquote, secular epistemology, or at least modernist epistemological and metaphysical sort of categories. So why even play that game? Why? That's what I've always been confused about. Why should we be stepping over into a different discourse? I understand that people do it, and it's tempting, and it's attractive to a lot of people, and there are really interesting sort of arguments that can come out of that. But for me, as someone who's basically just committed to confessing Jesus as Lord, I'm just confused a little bit about why we need to step into that other discourse instead of just confessing and proclaiming the truth that we're a part of as Christians.
Well, that's exactly it. We're not modernists. As Christians, we're not modernists. Like, we don't affirm the existence of the world as a closed system where we can clearly distinguish between things God did and things everyone else did. No, our religion is an interpretive tool that helps us make sense of the world around us. So I don't really know why there's such a push to say, okay, accepting everything that the philosophical modernists accepted, we're going to try to figure out how to get God into this. No, why would we do that? It's not what we believe. It's not what we practice. Like, why bother? I don't.
I guess I've never heard a good answer to that, is why I'm asking. Right? Yeah.
What'd you say, John?
I just said I've never heard a good answer to that from.
Well, I know that the logic is that this is the way to get and retain converts, to which I would say, I've never seen any good evidence it is. If anything, I think that some of the stuff, like, I think about the apologetics curriculum I got pushed through when I was in high school, and if you had written something that was designed to push people out the door as fast as possible, I don't think you could have done a better job. So,
why is that? What do you mean?
I mean, So I'm gonna try really hard not to like name publishing platforms or anything here. I think the thing that about it, so we in our high school youth group, we did like graduating seniors did like an 8-week apologetics curriculum of basically this is what your history professors and your philosophy professors are going to try to teach you, but we're going to try to give you a big old inoculating dose against all that stuff right now and tell you what you're supposed to believe, which for one thing is completely antithetical to the project of sending your children to college. The idea of going to college is you're supposed to broaden your mind, learn things. And also, one thing that I think was incredibly upsetting for me as a college student is you get there and you go to your first history course and you start finding the mistakes almost immediately. So this curriculum
that's how a lot of people deconvert, because they were raised in a much stricter.
Right.
See, that I'm very sympathetic to people who deconvert from that. I mean, I'm not sympathetic, but I get it. Because
you cannot blame them. You cannot blame them for if you are told that the best reason to be a Christian is because Josephus
is this fake piece of thing that's not true.
Right.
I thought you guys said that this was sacrosanct. We did. Shut up. Don't ask questions. I mean, if you listen, I interviewed Paul Agia and I interviewed Drew, and their stories were very similar. In that they started talking about, they were basically raised and trained to believe if you doubt this proposition of Christianity, the sacred cows of Christianity, it's what I started out talking about. Yeah. If you doubt that this sacred cow of Christianity is true, then you're going to throw out the whole thing. Right. And they think that that's an intelligent defense of Christianity, but it's actually inviting somebody to throw out the whole thing, because they're going to inevitably find out that particular sacred cow isn't so.
Right.
And if you're basing your faith on things that isn't so, that's not a robust defense of your Christianity. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So it's gonna fall apart when you start finding out that, like, I don't know the tale on the Exodus, but even that one, I don't really know the history. But I know that's coming under question, and I think the questions are fairly legitimate, I think, but I don't really know.
I mean, the one I remember as a college student was why it's hilarious now. Why should you believe there was a historical Jesus? Which, in retrospect, no academic thinks there wasn't a historical Jesus. Like, this was not something we needed to be spending youth group time on. Like, you're not, unless you're at like one university in the world, you're not going to have a professor who thinks there wasn't a Jesus. But, and the big reason for why this curriculum said you should believe there was a Jesus was because of all the extra biblical evidence for him. So Josephus says he was the Christ, and Tacitus mentions him, and Suetonius, I can never say his name, Suetonius mentions him. And these are the facts that the Josephus reference is not accurate, and the other sources are like late and confused and dependent on Christian sources. Those are the exact arguments that mythicists marshal to argue that Jesus didn't exist. So why are we so fixated on this? And again, part of the problem is because these things are not written by scholars of history. They're not written by people who are really thinking about what's going to happen in a history curriculum and how to respond to it responsibly. These are written by parents who are trying to figure this out by like Googling stuff. And then they're giving this to their children and telling them, okay, go tell your college professor this, and then tell them why he needs to be an evangelical Christian. And they're shocked when it goes bad. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah, but that's kind of fun and innocent. I mean, okay, I'll give you the example from that in my church. Now, keep in mind, my church is the church that I used to go to. I was really a big member of, and this is in Southern California. And some of these people are, really high functioning people in society, like, $30 million houses and stuff. Yeah. And one of them goes to me. It was when what was that stupid movie about with Tom Hanks that the Christians got all triggered out about? That was
Da Vinci Code.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm
That
I'm hanging out with this really successful person who works on movies, and his wife goes, "Here's our defense against the Da Vinci Code." And I'm like, "Da Vinci Code? Who on earth cares?" I'm like, "Oh, okay. Who cares?" It's like they don't get that it's totally irrelevant. It's not why people are deconverting. It's not something we need to even concern. You know, there's an innocence there. What I'm trying to point out that even with people who are sophisticated intellectually on some level, there's a Dumbo innocence of like, I don't know, they just don't get it. They don't get what the real challenges to the church are. So they fixate on things that are borderline irrelevant or not that, or stupid.
Yeah. So I was probably 15 or 16 when the Da Vinci Code came out. That movie came out.
Right, and they probably railed against it at your church, right?
We spent months on it.
Okay,
But,
see?
But
Think how stupid that is. It's a freaking, it's a movie. You go to a movie once, and if nobody's railing against the movie, they never got the message towards a high school person. You go to a movie, no matter how cool a movie is, you go to it once, and if nobody's railing against it and telling you it's dangerous, you forget all about it. Oh yeah, that movie was okay. It was boring.
It wasn't even that good.
No, it was terrible.
Yeah.
But okay, so what were they saying? That's a perfect example. That's like they had a satanic panic in your church about it.
We probably still do. They're probably still at my parents' house. We had all these books about it, about like what to say to your friends who saw the Da Vinci Code and how to, you know. But then again, it's constant. This is always like on a 5-year cycle in evangelical churches, because before that it was Harry Potter, and then after I graduated it was Twilight. You know, like there was always something.
Wow, I didn't. Twilight's the vampire ones, right?
Yeah.
Those are of the devil. See, there you go.
It's so bizarre because it was written by a Mormon lady, so they're actually quite conservative in their execution. But no, it's again, if your kid gets into vampires, it's only a hop, skip, and a jump until they're
right. But even at churches where I'm getting something out of it. See, I'm different from other people, and my wife is too, that we can kind of process the stupid part out and ignore it. Other people don't seem to be able to do that. Like I can hear a message from like somebody and go, okay, I agree with this, and then they say something stupid and outlandish, like, oh God, how could they think that? Like I remember going to a church and they were talking about what were the little characters that you put in your pocket? Pokemon.
Pokemon! Oh yeah, people hated Pokemon when I was a child. How they were demons. Oh yeah, no.
Yeah, and she's like, Pokemon is nothing but a pocket monster. I was like, dude, it's a little cartoon character. Get a grip. You know, even if you're right, get a grip. You see how it's perceived in like the real world and process it accurately. You know, with some perspective. It's, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Even if it technically has some occult attachment, which I'm sure it does, and I'm sure there's some reality to it, you know, just pray about it and be done with it. Forgive me for this evil toy.
Yeah, absolutely.
John, what did you want to say? I'm sorry.
I was just saying that Pokemon was actually banned from my school when I was in elementary school.
Yeah, mine too.
The playing cards. Do you remember those, Craig?
No, I didn't know any of this stuff. I was raised in a regular suburb, so there was none of this.
Gotcha. Well, I didn't understand why those were banned, other than like Christians saying that apparently people think that they're demons. So, yeah.
The only time I had exposure to it, I went ironically. There was this group when I was at college. This group that called themselves Rock and Roll Search for God. That was the name of the presentation. Nice. And I was like, this is going to be fun. And nobody would go with me, but everybody was there ironically. Like they started showing like, look at how rock and roll is degenerate. And they showed like Sid Vicious and the whole place went, Sid, including me. So everybody was there like, you know, to have a laugh. And they talked about some of the backward masking and like, I don't know, they had weird.
Wait, Craig, when did you graduate from high school?
87.
87. Okay. So you're like coming up through like the Van Halen period.
Yes, absolutely. Van Halen, the best summer anthem is written by Van Halen. Most people don't know that. The Dance the Night Away. That was play every summer. You'd hear that in a Camaro driving past my window. It's yes, so Van Halen was huge. I still love. I like Van Halen more now than I did then.
We have a record on the wall
next to me. I can show it to you.
What's that?
got a Van Halen record right on my wall. It's Van Halen 2 right there.
Oh, cool. And then I was a classic rock snob, and they were too meatheady and too metal. But then when I was like 23 or so, I started realizing that they were really good. But yeah, those were the years. The 80s was the best time to be in high school. I swear to God. It was
I
so
love
fun.
those movies. That alone. Yeah.
But that's fantastic. Think about how fun that actually is. Like one time when I was in 10th grade, we actually literally went to a mall, smoked a joint, and went to watch The Breakfast Club in the movie theater.
Awesome.
The actual Breakfast Club.
That's
in the movie theater, stoned. I mean, that's like, you can't.
That is the most 80s thing I've ever heard in my life.
Exactly. I have so many stories like that are like so iconically 80s. We went to see The Princess Bride, and we went through the same transformation that the kid goes through. We went in cynical.
Oh my God.
Somebody said, like, this movie's really good, trust us. So we went, and we're all like, oh, this movie's gonna be so lame and boring. And then we were like lit up at the end. We were like, oh my God. And we were quoting like, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. We went through the same transformation as the kid in the movie. Exact same one. And we saw it in the movie theater.
Yeah.
So the 80s was the best. It was the best time to be in high school. I swear to God, it was great. It was great. You heard like Madonna at parties and like Cyndi Lauper. It was unbelievable. Okay, so where were we? What were we talking about? What era were you? What?
I don't
I have
remember.
no idea what we're talking about.
Well, we're just conversating at this point.
Oh no! I love this. I love just three Christians on a phone talking. I think this is great. So yeah.
Totally. So what era were you? You were raised in the aughts as a Christian?
I graduated from high school in 2007. So like 2003, 2007 were my high school years. The first big like college movie I remember was Dark Knight, actually.
Oh man, that was I saw that.
It was a great movie.
I saw that down the road here in 3rd Street Promenade. That was so fun.
Yeah, we went at midnight the night it came out. First people in the world to see the Joker. That was pretty spectacular.
Yeah. That's the whole thing. That performance of the Joker is what makes it. It was just so next level. It was so
I've
brilliant.
never really had any interest in any of the Batman movies since. Like, I just feel like that we're done. That's all we needed. So yeah.
I'm trying to think. I actually liked the third one because I thought Anne Hathaway was surprisingly good as the Catwoman.
She's a great actress. I like her. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But so you were raised strict religious when you were in high school, correct?
Well, it was always a really crazy combination because on one hand there was this cultural expectation in our churches of what we were supposed to be like, and I have pretty strict parents. But and John can attest to this if he didn't just turn off his camera. The weird trade-off is that that's just not really the kinds of people my parents are. So a huge part of my teenage years was actually my father is super into like classic horror. So we were always watching these horror movies we were way too young to watch, and this was just sort of so on one hand we were going to these very conservative religious services that were telling us that, when women, we were supposed to grow up to be mothers and nurturers and to support our husbands. And then we'd come home and watch The Shining, So
wow. That's a dichotomy.
Yeah, it was kind of wild, but it was, I think my parents, they were kids of the 60s, they were born in the late 50s. And I think for them, the idea of cultural Christianity just hadn't really taken hold yet when they were growing up.
Did they become Christians later in life too? Did they convert from?
My father did. My father, he was raised like going to church and didn't really have any kind of a attachment to it.
Right.
But then when he was 18, he ended up at a hostel in the British Columbia with a bunch of Pentecostals and spoke in tongues and got baptized. So there was a very, but that was during his like sort of lost years as a hippie. So he was a later convert, but my mother was always Christian. So I think that for us, when I look back at how I was raised, a lot of it was because my parents didn't have the same kind of expectations of cultural Christianity that the larger evangelical church did. Like on one hand, it was very strict in that we were supposed to like get great grades and don't drink and don't sneak out and, you know, all that stuff. But you know, a lot of this more performative, you know, we only read these kinds of books, we only go to these kinds of movies, we only hang out with these kinds of people. That just wasn't really part of it. But it was crazy whiplash because then we'd go to church and hear how important this was.
Well, it probably, if people came over and saw you watching The Shining, there's some busybodies who would have like reported you to the church. Because that's what happened to Drew.
Tell people. We were not supposed to tell people that like we'd be at home watching Silence of the Lambs and then not go to church. So,
Right. That's what I was trying to explain to Notes from Autumn. I was like, there's Catholics have been Catholics for so many centuries that they kind of mastered the art of a healthy hypocrisy, wherein, and I don't mean it as a pejorative. I mean it as like when they say like you know, the Catholics that I hung out with when I was in high school were just as crazy as everybody else.
Oh yeah.
They went home an hour earlier and they got just as drunk as everybody else, but they went home an hour and a half earlier and went to church the next day and confessed. And everyone said tisk, 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 and just kind of looked the other way.
And they just moved on their lives, The other folks that unlock are Baptists. This is so like Baptists and alcohol, I think, is the classic example of this. I have known so many Baptists who don't drink around other Baptists.
Oh, wow. I didn't
like, that's really just it. Like, they don't, if there are going to be people from church there, they're going to be in a restaurant and there's a possibility that another Baptist might walk through, then you can't order a beer. But when you're back at home, it's just anything goes. Yeah.
Right. And the Catholics in Ireland, forget it. I mean, they must just sort of totally disregard the scriptures that are admonitions against drinking completely because they're always drunk.
Irish
yeah. And so how that worked in my own family, I mean, families have their own way of doing this anyways. Like, I was technically always supposed to be home at 12. What time am I supposed to be home tonight? Come home no later than 12 or 1. And I was like, okay. And I come home at 3 in. You know, nobody ever seemed to notice or be awake. And like, what time did you get home last night? Was it 12? Oh, I'm pretty sure it was around 12. You know, everybody knew, nobody cared. Like, that's kind of like, that doesn't happen in fundamentalist environments. Like, they don't negotiate between an ideal and a reality. They expect you to not go do things. That's what I got, which is different from other sects of Christianity, right?
Yeah, yes. And I think the mediating position is honestly shrinking, to be honest.
Is what?
I think that the mediating position of, you know, like, we understand that kids are kids and they, you know, and they need to figure out some of the stuff on their own. I think that part of the Christian population is actively shrinking. Because, you know, as more of these, and I think coronavirus probably sped a lot of this up, you know, a lot of people who were not as strict and not as fundamentalist, there's just other competitors in their lives, and the frequency in which people go to church is decreasing. So I think that the ultimate face of Christianity in the United States, I think we're going to have a much more conservative turn, because these are the ones who are, at least to some extent, retaining their members because it's so strict, you know. And if you can arrange a marriage for your 17-year-old by the time he's 20 and get him in the church, you know, you have a lot more likely, you have a much stronger chance of keeping your child in the church than someone who does kind of have this idea of, you know, like, okay, well, we'll just see where you are. And
wait, so are you saying that you think the hardcore, more strict conservative fundamentalists are going to retain? And I don't think
they're going to grow, but I think they're going to shrink a lot slower than the other parts of Christianity. And it wouldn't surprise me if the face of Christianity, if it isn't already, in a few years, is basically fundamentalist. Yeah. So.
So what do you think of that, John? You agree with that theory?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely
He's going to go, yes, dear. That's what I would do. Yes, dear. That's a great point, sweetheart.
I'm going to mute myself and turn off my camera.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I basically agree. I don't think it's going to be fundamentalism per se that is the dominant sort of Christianity in the United States. I definitely agree that something like the mainline church, the mainline denominations, because we're declining, and I'm a mainline Christian, because our churches are getting so small and shrinking pretty much by the day. And it's on this sort of downward kind of trajectory. It's certainly not going to be a mainline tradition. I think it's just going to be sort of conservative evangelicalism, which is already the dominant sort of
what are the ones that are growing in Africa?
Conservative.
Yeah, it's still, even in Africa and in the global south, sort of more broadly, it's definitely more conservative, kind of evangelical and charismatic Christianity that's growing.
So why do you think that is? Do you think that like wussy Christians are not offering enough to people to be a difference between a secular and Christian? Is that kind of what it is, or no?
I think it's due to the fact that the primary sort of missionaries who are going to these contexts are coming from more conservative and charismatic.
Oh, that's true, actually, yeah. Because they're still...
It's a difference in terms of like methods of evangelism, I think. Because mainline churches aren't necessarily doing the same sorts of things as sort of more conservative evangelical churches in terms of how they think about mission work, how they engage with people in different countries. So I think that's probably why. Yeah.
Well, does your church do evangelism? Are you doing like outreach, and are you trying to like bring in converts and preach the gospel in a sort of traditional way, or no?
Not really. It depends on what you mean by that. Do you mean?
I don't know. Okay. whatever you think it is.
By traditional kind of conversion, but
well, are you doing like are you doing outreach and missionary and trying?
Oh, for sure. The goal isn't really to get people in the doors necessarily. That's a great thing if it happens. I think the goal for us, at least my church, in terms of our missional engagement and really engagement with the community around us, is to basically exemplify Jesus in the way that we act, in the way that we speak, and in prayer, hopefully through that, God will be kind of drawing people in, and that does happen. It really does.
Do people do people become Christians? Do you do an altar call?
No.
Okay.
We don't. No.
Because just how complicated this actually is, just to give you a sense. The church I go to is kind of technically an evangelical. I think the Pastor Mel would call himself a conservative Christian. He isn't, but I think he would call himself that. And he kind of is sort of, but like, for example, his wife will half the time she'll preach, and sometimes she'll even like, she does a lot of like times where she'll take like Wednesday night and she'll preach entire sermons sometimes. So there's not even a thought process on that. It's just, that's not even a controversial or even a thought. So there's some things that just sort of, it's really complicated because like, as Laura was talking, like they were still, when she was in, high school, worried about women preachers. There are other people who call themselves conservative Christians who wouldn't even think about that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like they don't even think about it. It's not controversial in my church at all. And I wouldn't expect it to be.
Is it more? Do you go to a bit more of a charismatic church?
I do. My
so
church is.
Yeah, that's very typical.
That's probably why, actually. A lot of the sort of more charismatic evangelical churches.
Well, the thing that I became a Christian in is a vineyard.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So I think the worship service that they do was like not Bethel, because that's somehow controversial. I don't know why. I don't know the details. But the Hillsong, I think, like that was kind of, I think they're sort of what I am. I think.
Yeah.
I don't really know that well, but.
Yeah. No, but that actually doesn't surprise me. I think that it's a lot more common. The more charismatic your churches are, the more likely they are to be more open to women in services, which follows very naturally from the charismatic idea that, once you have the anointing of the Spirit, once you have the calling of the Spirit, then you have as much right to speak as anyone else, because like, what are you going to do? Tell the Spirit to shut up? So
right, exactly. There was a woman who prophesied at my church in California, in Malibu. Actually, there's a lot of women preachers I've seen, hundreds. We used to go to this Dr. Michelle Corral woman who did like, gifts of the Spirit type thing. were you charismatic at all, Laura, or no? Do you just
I
vaguely know what they are?
Yeah, no, actually, I mean, I started going to a charismatic church when I was doing my master's, and it's been on and off a part of my life ever since. Honestly, you know, I have a lot of fascination with that tradition. I think that I think the egalitarian and community implications of charismatic activity are really fascinating. That you can have churches where responsibility for teaching and leading is not dependent on seminary education. And like that's not to disparage seminary education at all, which is terrific. And if you want it, you should definitely get it. But that does tend to create a lot of barriers for people who serve God faithfully their whole lives and can offer a lot for a community, but just don't to that gatekeeping thing. So I think it's great. I think it's fascinating. And I tend to really like going to churches where that's part of the service. To be honest, so
yeah. Well, I mean, there's different flavors of it because there's some that would appeal to people, and I'm sure there's some who are more strict and fundamentalist. I always took it as like Southern California plays a big role in, you know, how laid back our church, the first church I went to, seemed to be, because it was like, to the untrained observer, it was like, you know, I didn't struggle to invite anybody I knew from my past, and the people I know in my past are really worldly as they get, you know, and I didn't like think that there was going to be something that they'd freak out about. You know, they might think this is weird or that, but there was no like, this is too religious for them or this is too much for them,
right?
You know, which isn't true of everything I've attended in the California area. There's some things I wouldn't let anybody, like someone like my mother, near, you know, because they'd never go to church again. So you've attended some of the. I don't really know I don't really know that much about how this all works out culturally. Like, that's part of like not being raised Christian. You know, you don't really have a good idea of what these different denominations actually mean because you weren't raised on the inside. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh, well, and I actually kind of wonder if that's part of the superpower that like large charismatic churches in Southern California can have, is that if you're attracting more converts, or at least converts to that kind of Christianity, it's less likely you're going to create these ossified structures where there's some really strict norms of behavior that if you mess with that, that's going to be a really big problem. So I don't know. That actually seems like a really interesting thing that your church is able, or at least the first church you went to, was able to provide that other churches since.
Well, the first church I went to was unique, and it was awesome, actually, and it was totally on fire. And the guy who ran it was a guy from South Africa, and he was brilliant. As a pastor, he was brilliant. But he wasn't that, he didn't have that, he kind of was too full of himself. Like, he started getting on Christian TV and stuff because he was super talented. And that church fell apart, partially because of that, because it went to his head a little. And there was this whole falling out. And so we haven't really found a replacement for it, but it was unique. You know, it was Southern California. It was right here in Malibu. So, like, there were celebrities who went there. And there was, like, the worship team was ridiculous. It was like super talented. Like, you couldn't even believe it. Like, Lifehouse was on the worship team. I don't know if you know them. They were like,
I do know Lighthouse. Do they no, that's Creed. I was thinking I'm trying to think of that Can You Take Me Higher song. Or is that Lifehouse? Is that Lifehouse or is that Creed?
They had this song I'm hanging by a moment.
Yes.
That got like a lot of radio play too. That's how I heard
that song went. That's when, right before they became famous, that Jason Wade was. I knew him. He was like in the worship. Yeah, he was pretty cool actually. His mom was a worship leader. It's a small church, so you knew basically everybody. And that was right before he was telling me, okay, and I saw he get written up in Rolling Stone. He was like, you know, our first album's coming out, and I think it's going to do well. And then that song went to like #1. The church fell apart though, and I haven't talked to him since.
I can't remember what the question was. Sorry, it's hard when you have three people. You're quiet for a second to let someone else talk, and then they don't talk, and then you're like, wait, what are we supposed to say?
Yeah, what are we actually talking about? We're kind of just like,
just messing around. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, the charismatic side of things is really, it's an interesting dimension to think about with these more conservative churches. Because on one hand, I think that charismatic churches are so often lumped in with these more conservative constructions of how to be a Christian, and rightly so, because a lot of times it does happen. If this more conservative churches might have a like an anti-medical bent. I know a lot of people who come from those contexts.
right.
Like, I needed physical therapy because I walked with a limp as a child, but we were supposed to pray it out. But it's, from my perspective, the charismatic side of things was actually quite liberative, because we came from this more frozen chosen concept of what it meant to be a Christian, where it's all very hierarchical and top down, and people don't participate in service unless they have a degree from such and such, and then the charismatic idea offers you a chance to sort of mess around with that a little bit. And
yeah, totally. I mean, historically, they got in trouble because they were the first people to cross the color line. And they were like black ministers, and that freaked everybody out. That's why they were controversial originally.
Right.
And that's like, that's kind of weird to think of, but that's, that was as recently as the 1920s.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually one of the, Laura, you mentioned this sort of frozen chosen idea, which tends to be kind of, Presbyterians tend to get sort of described that way, which is like, we know that like we're saved, and so when we come to church, we can just kind of go through the motions and just say the liturgy, listen to the sermon, go home. There's no sort of like real activity in worship, especially in like the worship space on Sunday mornings, right? I think that's actually a problem for pretty much all of the mainline denominations. That they lack a sort of like charismatic or spirit-filled sort of dimension to their worship. And I really, really wish that we had more of that. That's one of my main gripes with the kind of Christianity that I'm a part of, is that it's not charismatic enough. I wish we would be praying for God to heal people and for the Spirit
and for
to
impartations. Show up. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you introduce that into churches that don't have it, but
so it's something that I really appreciate charismatic churches quite a lot. And you mentioned earlier, Craig, that there are definitely a lot of different flavors of that. And the kinds that I don't really like very much tend to turn the gifts of the Spirit into sort of conditions for your salvation.
Right.
Especially speaking in tongues. There are certain kind of strands of sort of Pentecostalism and charismatic Christianity that say, if you don't do this, if you don't speak in tongues, if you don't have this certain gift, then you're not saved. And so anyone who doesn't do that is kind of in trouble, right? I don't like that stuff, but I do like the idea of the gifts of the Spirit being sort of a robust part of our life together as the church. And I really, really, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is like you said, how do we actually introduce that into a kind of tradition of Christianity that has sort of lacked that historically and still does. So, yeah,
it's an interesting question. I don't know what's the answer, Laura. Is there an answer to that?
I mean, from my perspective, we've talked about this, of course.
Do you go to his church?
Yeah, I do.
Is she like a good member of your church, or is she kind of like wayward?
Yeah, she just. We really just put up with her.
I figured. Okay, so I'm sorry, I cut you off, Laura.
Thanks, John. I this is definitely something I've thought about as someone who goes to this church, and I guess the place I've kind of contended myself to thinking about it now is praying for it. Praying for God. And the other thing too is you never want to impose worship styles or certain experiences onto a congregation, because God, this kind of goes back to this whole Memphis thing, right? That you don't want to act like this is the only right way to do something and anything else is scary. God is capable of meeting people in a tremendous number of ways.
Right.
And lots of people go through life participating in one particular kind of worship, one particular kind of church, one particular denomination, and they never move outside of it. So I think one thing I've just been content to do is pray for, hey, God, if this is something that you want these communities to be doing or experiencing, if you think that'd be good for them, then, give us the holler, let us know. But I also think that's done with the possibility that, God might say no, and God might know better than us and might know that, if this becomes part of a service, that some people will not feel welcome there anymore. Especially because some people do have, I think part of just being a pastor in a church is acknowledging that people bring their bad experiences of past churches with them to church. And a lot of people do have bad experiences in those churches where there is sort of this controlling or obsessive dynamic about how to think about these issues. And
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
it's definitely.
Yeah.
When you talk, let me ask you a strange question that just occurred to me. How, because I noticed that you start to talk when you feel comfortable talking about God. You do a lot of what I do. You censor yourself on saying things because you know how they're going to sound a certain way to a certain type of person. And then sometimes you'll just, do you know what I mean? Do you float in and out?
I agree that. I mean, part of it is
because I float in and out of Christianese. I can speak Christianese when I want to, but I almost studiously avoid it anytime I'm in public on YouTube or anything like that, because I'm aware of who's listening. So I don't think I speak it at all in my videos. I'd be surprised if I could say anything like, but go ahead. I think you know what I'm asking.
I think on one hand, I am the least diplomatic person I have ever met. I have no self-preservation instinct. If I want to tell someone to go to hell, that's exactly what I tell them. I have no self-control. I am the least diplomatic person I've ever met. But I think part of that is I have a real ear for inauthenticity. And if something doesn't sound like me, or if I'm talking to someone who is using language and terminology or a way of expressing their religious life that doesn't sound like something I grew up saying, that doesn't sound like something that I gravitate to, I can't do it. And I think that's, I think there's definitely I think everyone kind of, to some extent, everyone modulates the way they speak about all kinds of issues, but particularly something as personal as religion, to make themselves intelligible to other folks. Or at least
right. Totally.
But I think that, I guess, I know a lot of people for whom everything they say communicates being super churchy and being super religious. And yes. I think there's a few big reasons why I don't do that. One of them being that I don't think it's useful, but the other one just being that it's not.
It rings false to you.
It doesn't sound like me, and it also doesn't sound like a lot of people. Like, it just doesn't sound authentic to me. And there are people for whom
I'll give you two examples. The first. One of the times when my wife and I first became a Christian, we went to I forget, I was trying to get a job as like some Christian place, and this woman came up to us, and swear to God, every other word she said was, "Praise God." Yeah. So you're a new convert? Praise God. And then when we walk into the car, I started making fun of her. My wife got on my case. So I was like, she's like, she's being a really godly woman. My wife always gets on my case about it. So, and I was like, it was too much, Jen. I was like, And then the other time I brought my friend to church, my secular friend, my totally insane, alcoholic, Russian secular friend. I brought him to hang out with us after church because I figured it would go well. And it kind of did up to a point. There used to be, you ever hear, the place Joffrey's? It's like, it was in a couple of movies. One of the guys from the church I used to go to owned the place. So when we go to our Wednesday church thing, it was in the movie The Player. I don't know if you guys saw it. It's an old movie at this point. we would go there after church and there'd be dinner for us, and he'd have this like pasta dish that we'd all eat, and it was like he shut the place down, we'd all hang out there, and it was really awesome. And my friend was there, and one of my other friends started like really being like giving him the hard sell, like I don't know, it was really strange. It was like they got nervous that he was as secular as he was, and I don't even know what was going on. He looked at me and he's like, pass the Kool-Aid. I was like, uh-oh. They started doing, I don't even know what happened, but it's like this self-conscious, like, now is the part where I've got to be religious and get, totally authentically demonstrate to you how Christian I am with every word I say. I don't know.
Also, I gotta make you a Christian before the end of the night. Like, I gotta make this happen. And
right.
If you're not used to hanging out with people from a range of backgrounds, then I think that's where the inauthenticity comes in. Like if you're comfortable with people from a range of backgrounds and like have genuine relationships with them, you're gonna talk like a normal person. But if you don't do that, then there's going to be, it's like not knowing, it's like living in a nation where you haven't assimilated and learned the language yet. It's going to be this issue. So,
but that's exactly what it is. It's like some Christians live on a totally different planet than the world. And that's good up to a point, but it's also like weird up to a point, because some things that get processed that are normal, like a normal person responds to something like Pokemon, the Christian processes like they're from a different planet. And they don't recognize it. Right, John? Isn't that what happens? Or no?
Yeah, I think that something that's been helpful for me kind of thinking about this is that we tend to have this conception of like the church and the world as being sort of completely separated from each other.
Right.
And that there's this sort of distinct border between them, which sort of, you have this sort of insular conception of the church, right? I think a lot of people think about the church that way. I wonder if it could be helpful if we think about the church less in terms of these hard borders and more in terms of sort of porous borders, because we're still people when we're out in the world engaging with other people, other human beings who are like us and whom we're like. And I worry a bit about just turning the church into this sort of insular thing that has its own language that can't actually communicate with other people.
Well, that's a big part of what happens. It isn't like you're supposed to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove, and you're supposed to be in the world but not of the world, but you can be wise as a serpent, which means you can easily speak the language of other people and pretend like you're one of them. That's what I'm really good at.
Pretending.
Yeah, I don't know if it's pretending or not. But,
there are people who, you can talk to, and your religion will never come up unless it's the appropriate time. Unless it's
that's me. That's me outside of on Twitter and YouTube. I'm here for a reason, and that's why I'm here. But in my real life, very few people know I'm a Christian. Well, friends from my past. And go ahead. I cut you off. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was had to say that about that. Yeah. So.
Right, but that's exactly what you meant, right? That when it comes up organically, and truthfully, it doesn't come up all that organic. Pass the salt. By the way, Jesus is what you need right now. It really doesn't come up automatically that much. Yeah. My one friend was struggling because he was teetering on divorce, and then it came up, and I gave him prayer lines, and the prayer lines totally were freaking. They hit him up for money, and they tried to ask him if he was going to hell. I was like, oh, God, you can't trust these people at all, man. So, there you go. Should we see if we have questions? How long has this been?
Yeah, over.
How long? What time is it? I don't even know.
22 here.
So, we've been chatting for an hour and a half. Wow, I didn't even notice. She went after Lee Strobel. SJ, a Christian church. I don't know what they're talking about. Something. See, usually John is here. Grandmaster Flash goes on and on. His zodiac sign is Capricorn. It can't be true. 80s movies are the best. Yes, there we go. So we got. I'm trying to find the questions. Normally,
what is happening?
What?
I said, what is happening?
What's going on in the chat, guys? I saw one that's asked what kind of church I'm a pastor of. I think that was from SJ.
Yeah, what? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a United Church of Christ church. Craig and I talked about that a little bit. It's technically within the Reformed tradition, although the way that it sort of takes expression now is not quite that. It's a bit more sort of progressive politically, and yeah.
It's liberal, but Laura, you're political. You're liberally political too, but you're kind of still a traditional Christian in some ways, right? Just like
right.
John's.
Yeah, I mean, I think being politically liberal and being theologically conservative are things that go together just fine. Theology and I think that's part of what the challenge is when people talk about like conservative and political. When I use the word or liberal, when I use the word conservative or liberal to talk about, or progressive to talk about Christianity, I mean theology. Like that's primarily the thing I'm interested in, and I'll specify if I mean politically. Like sometimes those things go alongside each other, but sometimes they don't. Like a lot of Black American Christianity is, the people who go to those churches are de facto Democrats. They've been registered their entire life, but they're actually very conservative theologically speaking.
Yeah, totally. But they're also, a lot of them are somewhat conservative politically too. They just, there's this whole, politics is also weird because there used to be, there isn't as much anymore, but there used to be a type of Democrat who was really conservative politically, like a JFK, blue collar working man Democrat, who they stayed a Democrat because of class and because the Democrats had their back when it came to like labor unions and things like that. So they always voted with the Democrats, but they still
exist in the South to some extent. Like there was sort of like a trade union Democrat or like a healthcare Democrat, basically. Whereas like the more social issues are kind of kept at a distance.
Yes, definitely. It started changing with the Reagan Democrats. That's where, because Reagan noticed that there was an opening there, that there was a lot of Democrats who were, in labor unions and stuff, but they were actually a lot more traditional. American bread and butter, rah, raise your flag, John Wayne type and there was some alienation between them and some of the culture of the the far left, because there's a disconnect there between those two cultures, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there isn't really anything that inherently links, sort of like the left side of the culture wars versus left-leaning economic policies. I don't think anything that inherently goes together except the sort of like broad tent conception of what it means to be a citizen. Right. But I mean, generally, I have I would say I'm a fairly, I don't know how, I'm probably like theologically, I'm a creedal Christian. I have a high value of, I have a high concept of the divinity of Christ. I tend to, I'm not really interested in the whole inerrancy debate, to be honest. I don't really get a lot out of that. I'm not terribly concerned about it. I think it does more harm than good. But I think all that is, you can really be, you can fit a range of social and political profiles and have that be true about you.
Yeah, totally.
It's really it's the product of the thing I'm always trying to remind Christians about, is the idea that being a Christian means you vote with a specific party. This was not something that was, this was not invented by Christians. This was invented by politicians who wanted to take your vote. This is not something that naturally works its way out of the church. This is a strategy that a political party made up to get you to feel like you have to vote for them. So I just think that's generally a good thing to remember. It used to be Christians were on, there was a fairly widespread of who Christians would vote for, even Protestants, even white Protestants. And the thing that did not change, as some people like to say, is it's not that one party became very godly and the other one didn't. It's that they used this as a way to sell you on making you feel like you had to vote for them.
Well, it's changed in both directions because, yes, what you're saying is true. And politics and political parties is always about coalitions of disparate interests that band together for weird reasons, usually. The reason why they band together they don't automatically go like, there's no real connection between evangelicals and libertarians, for example, that they fall under the banner of the right. And a lot of times Democrats, as I were raised, are somewhat closer in spirit to libertarians than we are to the new far left of like boutique issues on like whatever they're talking about these days. But there's coalition building that goes on in politics, and then somewhat of the Democrats, because the right has moved to the Christian has moved to the right, the Democrats have also started to become more secular. Like they did things like take under God out. So
that was actually a pre-convention meeting. The convention itself, they did say under God in the
right, but any idiot could have told you that was going to be on the news and everyone was going to notice it. And it makes a statement. Everybody is aware that that's a statement being made, and that's deliberately, not necessarily deliberately, but it's going to alienate it. If secular people, the reason why you can't run as an atheist is because so far they don't have the political clout because they don't have the numbers. It's that simple, right?
And one thing I would also say is just, looking at political trends, it is not within Democrats' best interest, which is why they don't do this. It's not within a Democrat candidate's best interest to run against Christianity.
Right.
That's not something Democrats are trying to do.
But they're toying with the idea of doing it. There are certain members of the Democrat, there are certain members of the left who are secular.
True. Because when you look at the stump speeches of Democrat candidates, everybody talks about being in the church. Everyone quotes from the Bible. Being Christian is still so normative in the United States that you
right. Well, that's exactly what I meant. That's why everybody is still saying, Christian God, Christian this and that when they're running, because you have to, if you want to appeal to a broad swath of the public.
Right.
But there is a movement within the Democratic Party that is against that, for sure. And they're there, and they want to secularize. And I don't know how strong the wing is. I'm not involved the way I used to be. So I have no idea. But
I think there's definitely some, and again, I don't know a lot of candidates on this front. I know some voters. I do think one thing that is very fair to try to resist, though, is the idea of Christian nationalism, trying to resist the idea that there is this sort of necessary performance of Christianity that you should do as part of being a ruling American leader. And, I actually think that this is something Christians should be fighting for. Christian nationalism it's not good for America, and it's really bad for the church. If there's something that we can all band together on, I actually think that getting this sort of performative God and country thing out of politics, I think that's great for Christians, because what that turns into is, the 81% of white evangelicals who voted for Donald Trump. When you break those numbers down, the number of people who think they're born again evangelicals who haven't been to church in a year is insane. That, it has become such a thing that, there are so many people for whom it is politically.
So what are you saying? They're lukewarm Christians? They're not real Christians?
There are enough people for whom it is advantageous for people to believe that they are being great Christians by voting for this or that person, and that's all they do, church related. That's bad for Christians. We don't want that. We don't want people to think that because they watch Fox News, they're Christians. We don't want people to think that. But I kind of get frustrated with how little interest there is in the church in trying to stop that. It just seems so transparently bad for us. But
it's so complicated. There's the guy Paul Vanderklay, who you would like, both of you would like. I think I posted the video for John, who's more. He's more like you guys. He's not necessarily, I think he's a lot more liberal than your typical Christian, but he's a pastor and he's even a Calvinist. But he's really philosophical, and he's been really heavily involved with race and integrating race into church and things like that. And he used to go to poor neighborhoods, and so there's always been what I'm trying to say is there's always been a strand of Christianity that's heavily left, in ideal sense.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Jesus, obviously the stuff that Jesus said about the poor, that resonates with a lot of people on the left who are Christians. And then there's been historically the black churches, which have kind of swung left, sort of, you know, they've always been historically Democrat.
They've been historically left. Democrats had actually traditionally been quite supremacists in the South, and there was a big switch.
Right, totally. And then there was that, yeah. I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying it's complicated. And
yeah.
And when the religious right became like a phenomena, a lot of that had to push me and to pull you to it. I think that's the only thing I'm trying to say. Like,
I definitely think that's true. It is obviously true that mainline Christians have responded to the religious right. Like, that's obviously true. It's not like they're just out in space and they're doing their own thing. But I guess one thing I would really like to see more Christians concerned about acting on is the extent to which this, you know, if you let somebody else adopt your brand, you are responsible for that, and it's going to affect the way people see you. And I think that there's an extent to which Christians have been a little quick to give out their brand because they thought they were going to get something out of it. And
well, totally. I mean, a huge thing, like, there are things that I could not send back to. The first thing that everybody thought when I became a Christian is, he's a conservative. That's it. That's all they cared about. And everyone in my family is really far left. Everyone in my town is really far left. Everybody I've ever knew. Where I grew up, you were on the left, period. It wasn't like even a question. So, like, the first thing most people thought, the first thing you had to, like, circumvent was putting people at ease that you didn't all of a sudden become totally conservative. Yeah. Now, I have become more conservative over the years. That could just be because I'm older and my wife is conservative.
And also, you're living in a left-leaning area. I think a lot of times people respond to that. So,
what, you mean I'm rebelling against all these?
No, seriously.
Yeah.
I've never been conservative is when I'm in a group full of liberals. I'm like, you guys are driving me.
Yeah, you guys are so annoying.
There's also like
oh my God, that's such a big part of it because I can't stand like the SJWs and the woke people. And that's because I'm on Twitter all the time and I'm in California. And I'm like,
you're a punk at the end of the day, Craig. That's still in you. The punk rock is still in you.
Yes. That's a big part of it. There's a lot of like, yeah, because the part of the left I can't stand is the woke and the SJWs and the stuff that you were talking about. We all sort of understand there's a toxic element.
There's a moneyed class that I think people react to, and that comes across as snobbery. And like this happens on the right and it happens on the left, and people get very frustrated with it. So
right. But there's also like, there's a weirdness to the left these days that didn't used to be. Like, nobody knows my wife is conservative except on YouTube. I will not tell people because they will judge her differently. I've thrown that out there and I've seen it work. Where they act totally differently. And I was like, and there's nobody who I wouldn't say like, this person is liberal. There's no conservative I know. I don't know that many, but there's none that they're just totally would take it in stride if I said, oh yeah, that person's really liberal. Oh, okay. They wouldn't think any differently of it. So that's just anecdotal, but.
Well, I kind of wonder about that. We're kind of wading into the weeds here. But I wonder if part of that is 30 years ago or 40 years ago, how prevalent was it that you would know a white person who was some kind of minority? I wonder if that's part of it, that, like a lot of the stuff becomes so personal because your political views are very often tied to your beliefs about the validity of somebody else's identity or the extent to which they deserve some kind of like social protection. Because I think that, it would be very difficult for a person who is gay or has gay family members to, and this is something I think is often missed when people talk about, like, how can we all get along with politics? Like, well, to be fair, I actually get why there's a huge social division. Like, I get that really strongly, why there's a huge social division between somebody who is gay or has a gay family member, and somebody who doesn't think gay marriage is something that should be like, legally sanctioned. And I think a lot of times this whole like, how can we all get along thing misses that there are some things that are actually really hard to get along around because they are so intensely personal. And I don't think that's necessarily owing to some sort of hypersensitivity on behalf of anybody. It's just the way it is. Like if you just think somebody's marriage shouldn't be legally valid, you're going to have some kind of beef with them. Like it would be impossible for John and I to be close with someone who thought that interracial marriage shouldn't be legal, So I guess I think that's part of, when people want to talk about why are things so contentious now, I think it's because of the extent to which these extremely personal loaded issues end up on ballots, and then it's, and then the ballot necessarily has some bearing on how you see other individuals. Mm-hmm. So
that's definitely part of it.
Yeah,
it's definitely part of it, but I don't know. There's
some issues for which this is true and some which there aren't. Like if you don't think that, everyone should get Medicare, it's not like I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, man, we're gonna, like, there's obviously all kinds of issues that are not nearly as personal, I don't think. But
well, there's some that aren't as deeply polarizing, and they aren't as like, there's some issues that aren't as hot button and wedge issues and polarizing, and then there's some that are totally polarizing, but still, I mean, it's just weird for me because I've always been of the mind that I don't really care what other people believe in their, it's not they can believe something. It's, how they act towards me personally is what I hold them accountable for. Not whether they have some like cockamamie belief about something or other, even if I thought that belief was ultimately destructive in a, on a societal level. I mean, I could make the same argument about secular people, and I have, but I don't make it to them and I don't hold them accountable. You know what I'm saying? As a group for belief.
I'm trying to, I mean, it's just so case by case, right? Because I definitely, I know people, like, I have Muslim friends, and that's, obviously the state of being a Christian or being a Muslim is much more foundational to who we are as people than a lot of other issues, and that's not a barrier. But like,
right, that's a perfect example, though. Okay, right. So let's say I had a Muslim friend. This is exactly how it would go down. Now, let's say that Muslim friend believed some things that I was just like, wow, that's out there, and I ain't with that. And they thought like a woman should wear a bag over her. Let's say they were a hardcore Muslim. I would still take them for what they were, and I'd accept them for how they acted towards me. And if they started preaching that to me, like I needed to train my wife to do that, I'd be like, dude, that's none of your business. That's way over the line. But if they just told me that's their opinion, I'd be like, okay, whatever. We don't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't necessarily hold them. There's a whole complicated reason why that person believes that. And it's not necessarily a moral thing on them. When you're raised to believe something intensely, you tend to believe it intensely unless you have a really good, defeater or deconversion process or something like that. So I don't know how much I'd hold that person. I'd judge them personally for what they believed on something like that. That's exactly exactly kind of, because that's just how I am. You know what I mean? I think did that make sense?
Would it be hard for you to be friends with somebody who thought you were going to hell, you think?
No.
Yeah, it wouldn't. Yeah.
But I don't know. I said that in one of my, I thought maybe that had a lot to do with why people get so triggered out about Christians.
Right.
Because when I was growing up, I didn't know any fundamentalist Christians.
Yeah.
But I might have been a lot more triggered out if I was like hanging out on the weekends and hanging out with my friends, doing the things that I just thought were fun and normal. And somebody was telling me, you realize you're going to burn in hell for that. I might have a much different attitude towards those people. Do you know what I'm saying? That. So yes, that occurred to me.
Yeah, there's some kind of foundational experience of this being a harmful thing for other people to believe at you. That's. I was trying to think that, like, I guess.
But if somebody just personally thought I was going to hell, I don't think I'd care at all. It's if they insisted that I know that, all the time. Yeah, I get really annoyed with them. I'm like, okay, tenacity. But if they just thought it, and I knew they thought it, I don't think it really bothered me. Well, I don't know, John.
I'm right, because I gave it as an example because I was like, oh, this isn't, but like, I don't know if that would bother me. I actually, in fact, I don't know anyone who thought I was just like straight up going to hell. I've, interacted with lots of people who thought that if I did not repent of XYZ thing I believe, that didn't sound like something.
But the people who think, also knowing people who are conservative very closely, the things that she believes, she doesn't actually believe. She just insists that she does when push comes to shove. Right. That's why I kind of get along with her so easily, because I kind of understand it. It's like I've heard her say that, I don't know, it's really hard to explain. People are complicated, it's really hard to explain.
Really, right. It's like, surely we all have somebody who in our families who thinks we are colossally wrong about something, like maybe in a cosmic torment kind of way. I'm sure I have relatives who think that about me.
Right.
But like, do they actually think that? Like, do they actually think they're going to
No, that's the point. Right. No, I don't really think they do. They think it when their mind fixates on it. They go, uh-oh. And it's kind of like a free-floating thing that enters in when they train their thoughts on it, sure. Yeah. But do they really honestly believe it? No, because their behavior towards you would be so different.
Right.
They don't. They either have reconciled it somehow, like, she'll get it together in the long run, she's a good kid, or they've written you off that you're just amoral and I don't care.
And they don't need to
One or the other.
About it. Yeah.
Right? I mean, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you reconcile the inconsistencies in people really easily when you take them as a total person. Yeah. Then they don't jar out at you and you don't feel like you have to solve them or do anything about them. You're just like, okay, that's just part of who they are. Yeah. Right? Yes, no, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so I do think one thing that makes our position different from, like a gay person trying to, maintain relationships with family members who are not gay accepting is, I think there's something about the cumulative effect too that makes this a lot harder. That, for me, if I meet someone who thinks I'm straight up going to hell, that's kind of a fun aberration. Like, oh, okay, that person's nuts. But a lot of times, if you come from these, and this is where I do get the extent to which it's harder for it to just be water off a duck's back if this is something that happens to you constantly. Because most of the time, I just go through life, people just think I'm a nice lady, and nobody cares what I think about anything. But if you come from a background where every time you're trying to figure out if you're going to bring your wife home, it's a discussion and it's complicated. And every time you're going to be around your grandma, it's this, I think there's something about that cumulative effect. And then, then you meet somebody who's planning on voting for someone who doesn't think that these rights of yours are valid. It's just one more thing, like throw it on the heap, you're just like all the, so I think
so are you talking about fundamentalist Christians right now? Is that?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to think about, sorry, I kind of got on this because of the question of like getting along with people across political lines. And I think this is a big issue for why, like gay people with Christian parents have such a hard time, even if this isn't something you're constantly fighting about, or they have such a hard time with, like, with family members who aren't accepting. It's just because, it might not seem like on a one-off thing, like that big of a deal, but the cumulative effect is actually really, really challenging. So yeah, that's.
Well, I mean, if you're Christian family and you're gay and they're in your face about it all the time, obviously you're not going to get along. And if they're constantly trying to do I get it when let's take an atheist, because then it will depersonalize it. I get it with Seth Andrews was telling me about. His parents are constantly in turmoil over the fact that he's a famous atheist and they can't put it aside to interact with him. Right. I get why he's upset that they do that. I totally understand that, but that's not their belief. Right. That's them being douchebags. They can't reconcile their deeply held. See, I don't know. This is really easy for me. That's why I don't get it.
That's the thing. Is we live in an era where those aren't. All of this stuff comes as a package. I think that's what's so hard about this. And why it's so hard for people to have to have like healed relationships or meaningful relationships across lines is that like being a douchebag and having these beliefs in the way you vote, like these all just come as a package. And I think
I don't think so. I think that's what I think that's a thing that people on the left have been pushing for a long time, like the personal.
Well, I don't know if that's where it comes from. I think so much of this goes back to the moral majority and like Jerry Falwell, and I think so much of this goes back to that.
Maybe. I mean, I don't, because well, this is the question that I ask when I'm talking to an atheist who has that type of relationship. I imagine there are some Christians who are fundamentalists in that church community or something who are wise and down to earth and don't do that. I could be wrong, but I just sort of naturally think there are. Yeah. Most people do that type of stuff to one degree or another. Left, right, Christian, atheist, most people. There's a majority of people who consciously work on like not being like that, and they're the only ones who succeed. And that's what Christianity ultimately teaches you to do, that you're supposed to be the peacemaker and the one who's not asserting you're supposed to be the healing presence, the right? That's what I think Christianity teaches. So if my son were like gay and atheist, I would pray for him, but I wouldn't constantly harangue him about it. First of all, strategically, I think that'd be stupid. But second of all, because it's just alienating the kid. But like, second of all, I think the Christian thing to do is pretty clear. You just try to reconcile by being loving and compassionate and patient, be kind, merciful, long-suffering, something like that.
Yeah, and then you to control other people is just antithetical to the whole Christian idea. And,
right. Exactly. Yeah. So. But most people do that, and I don't think it's there's a bias in it. I think I know a lot of liberals who do it. I know a lot of conservatives who do it. There are some people who do it in ways that are benign, like my wife, and there's some people who do it in ways that are deeply poisonous, that ruin relationships and are destructive. Other people do it because they're just, it's annoying, but it's harmless. Does that make sense?
No. So I wasn't trying to get us down a big political rabbit hole, but it's hard not to think and talk about some of it when you're talking about religion, just because we live in an era where these things are so strongly associated with each other.
What about those? Do you guys know those like Rachel Held Evans and like those like, are they good? Are they on it or some degree or no?
I loved a lot of stuff Rachel Held Evans, rest in peace, wrote. I mean, some of it was, I don't know. I thought a lot of what the more autobiographical she was in terms of her own perspective, I thought she produced a lot of really amazing material. And it also was really helpful for, the thing that I think she'll always be remembered for is helping get Christian women out of these really repressive contexts. And someone's got to do it, like there are definitely things I hit by her that I just wasn't terribly interested in, that I thought I probably could have written better, but I didn't.
I could have written better than this. Who's this? This woman's a joke. I could write so much better than this.
She wasn't a scholar, really.
No one's fault. Yeah.
I think in terms of, so I don't know if you know, Craig, that she died last year.
I vaguely knew about that. I saw it on Twitter.
She was quite young, and it was a horrible thing. But I think that her stuff, from what I've seen, of especially going to school with women at Duke Divinity School, a lot of them were really, really moved by her kind of work of showing women that there's a way, sort of, when you leave evangelicalism, that it kind of gives them a way to kind of hold on to the good stuff of that faith, and also kind of beyond that. And she was just such a good, she was a great guide for that kind of transition out of evangelicalism, I think. And I didn't read much of her stuff, but I just know how important she was for so many women in my life.
So what do you think about this conversation that Laura and I sidetracked into about there's a reconciliation between Christianity, and how do you reconcile with politics, I guess, is that the ultimate question, Laura, or no?
Yeah, I guess there's two things I'm interested in. One is how do Christians think about politics, and also just how do Christians think about people they don't agree with. I think this is one of the hardest issues for us right now as a country, and rendered a little easier for me just because, you know, I'm not in a community, I'm not part of a group that's under any kind of political attack right now. So that makes things a lot easier for me. But I feel for people who don't share that experience. So I get that I might sound a little bit more ironic than some of those people. So I don't know.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot, and I don't have a clear answer to how we as Christians should always think at all times and places about politics. I think we gotta be flexible in terms of hearing from the Holy Spirit, where we're being called to engage politically, how we're being called to vote, what sorts of policies we're being asked to support as Christians. So I'm never gonna say that Christianity must be tied in this way to politics forever,
right,
in all places, because I'm always wanting to try and hear what God is asking us to do. And
yeah, I would agree with that.
We talked a little bit about Karl Barth last time. This is really a lot of what I learned from him, and he was very politically engaged. He was a pastor of a congregation in Stauffenville for a number of years, and he was pastoring a congregation who they were sort of they were the working class in that context, and they were under the supervision of bosses who were quite harsh to them, and weren't paying them very well and all of that. So obviously Barth was getting involved with this specific political party at the time, which was democratic socialism, in effect, that would work for and support the lives and rights of the working class. So that was a contextual move that Barth made in the light of what he thought God was asking him to do to support this congregation, right? That doesn't mean he would support democratic socialism in all times and all places. It was because this is what God was asking him to do in this particular context. So I'm trying to think in that way. What are the needs of the people in my congregation specifically? I think first and foremost because I'm a pastor.
Right. Yeah, of course.
And so how can I be the sort of person that votes in a way and that engages in a way that's going to support the people that I'm ministering to the most, and also the community of people around them as well. So that's kind of how I think about it. So I don't have like a big answer to that question. I'm thinking more kind of small scale.
Yeah, so you're thinking more small and personal, and doing what you believe God has called you to do, and somehow that's ultimately healing in the big picture sense.
I think it will be. I think
because you're going to vote for the right candidate, and you're not going to be deceived by the you're going to pull the lever for the right person, because you're going to be operating in your calling. Is that kind of what he said, Laura?
So John's whole thing on the ethics front is command ethics, that, you know, just Christians have to be, rather than being too committed to rules or standards or norms, that Christians just have to be open to the idea that if God is actively involved in the world and he's actively talking to his church, then the obvious payoff of that is that we're going to be hearing things from God about what we're supposed to do in new and different situations, and old rules and old norms aren't necessarily going to be useful. So I think that's just,
So we're supposed to be led by the Spirit, and God is doing a new thing. New wine for new wineskins, right?
Yeah. Right. Christianity isn't a rule-based ethics.
Yeah.
We're not about rules. We forget this. It's about listening to what God is asking. It's about hearing the command of God. You know,
hearing the command of God. I like that, actually. That works for me. Does that work for you, Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to take any more questions? I was going to make fried chicken for dinner, so I'm probably going to get on that fairly soon.
I have struggled to read the questions. So I'll give you. Let me ask you this before I let you guys go. So your experience on Pine Creek, I asked John about it more off camera. John, wasn't it? Didn't we chat about that off camera?
We did on camera too. I was a bit more uncensored when we were off camera about it.
Yes. That stupid
I think I've
freaking.
maxed out the minutes of my life I want to talk about this person. So,
You what? What did she say?
so I've maxed out the minutes of my life I want to spend talking about this person.
Oh, ooh. Okay. So tell me about your Twitter atheist relationship and YouTube, and what's your impressions thus far?
I haven't.
At this point, there's no atheists left in the audience, so be uncensored.
No. I mean, I actually don't mind. No. I think.
I only like Shannon.
Pretty much it, yeah.
That's a weird response to me, because I think on one hand, except for the ones who I think are just like genuinely interested in learning from people across demographic lines and want to do the same thing
Like
with
Shannon, Puck, Ethan. There's a bunch who are like that.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a class of normal people who want to have relationships and learn from people who aren't like them and just have quality time together. They're terrific. And the fact that, they have a different religious belief from me is almost beside the point, because we can just talk about things we're interested in.
Right.
The thing that's always really frustrating for me is that, I think some people get a lot of expectations about what you ought to be like because you're not a fundamentalist. And I think that is something that I just get endlessly really frustrated with.
Well, there's one response that happened to you a lot was, you're not a fundamentalist, therefore you're right about to deconvert. That was the first thing that was you were being sold as. This is this is our next feather in our cap. She's not a fundamentalist, therefore she can't still be a Christian for very much longer. Any day now, she's going to be...
It's not evangelical. Yeah, just not.
I'm still waiting for it. It could happen. We'll see.
Yeah.
The miracle of deconversion.
But then the other one that really irritates me is, so there's also this, there's Laura's the crypto atheist. She's just lying for the riches and power that comes from being a graduate student. You know.
It's plausible. It's plausible. There's a lot of money in graduate students.
Right. See how we live? We are trash. So there's the Laura's lying for the glamorous lifestyle of a graduate student. There's the Laura's about to deconvert, which I'm not. And then once people have kind of gotten over that, that's when people get real mean of this, how dare you make up your own form of Christianity instead of deconverting to which is ridiculous. I'm not making anything up. Like these are
no, I totally understand.
Sorry?
I totally understand that. Yeah, go ahead.
These were beliefs that were fully formed when I found them and had like centuries of Christians writers about them, or, maybe if they're newer issues, are well represented at seminaries all over the world who are talking and thinking about these issues and responding to them from a Christian perspective. That's everyone's religiosity, including atheists, including non-religious people, because you have a religiosity too. You have a way of thinking about the world that it doesn't include religion, or it doesn't include God, but it still has sort of the contours, like the community logic of a religion. Everyone's is different from the community from which they participate. Like everybody's understanding of ultimate issues and religiosity, whatever you want to call that, everyone's is individualized in some way, and it's insane to get mad at people about that.
Well, I actually had debates originally when I used to do more debates and more Twitter debates, and now I don't barely bother. But where the person was actually trying to convince me, because they had deconverted from a fundamentalist tradition, that the fundamentalist tradition that they deconverted from is actually Christianity.
Right.
And whatever I was practicing was some sort of, I had those experiences a lot. And I was like, that's just so from another planet.
No,
you converted from it because it was too dogmatic and binary. And now you're trying to say that that's the only way to practice. I mean, it was crazy. And it made you crazy to debate them. It made you feel insane.
Well, I think what's so frustrating to me on that front is that, if you're opposed to like fundamentalist religiosity that opposes science in schools or opposes medicine or, is bad for women, we are on the same team. Like we have a common cause. So, like, why are you trying to talk me out of?
Right. But that's I did a whole video on this, or 3, Whereas, like, why are they being evangelical? Because the argument you get from a lot of atheists is if you guys stop voting for against gay marriage, if you stop voting for, to get prayer in the school. And I was like, dude, I don't buy it. Because Laura Robinson is on your page and you didn't put the sword down,
Right.
And you're not.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But that's the thing. It's like then we're just moving right back into another category of religious fundamentalism where the most important thing is some kind of group coherence. And like I just reject that. I just reject the idea that the most important thing you can do in life is to get other people to agree with you. It's just like if there's not some kind of like larger vision about what you want out of this, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So that's
So you don't get into very many Twitter and YouTube debates these days.
When I do get snippy with people, it tends to be with other Christians, to be honest, who be, and I think this is actually good for Christians. I think that most of our critique should be community oriented. Like we're the ones we can fix. We're the ones with a shared understanding of what matters theoretically and like what our values are. So that tends to be it, because to be honest, I get way more frustrated with a Christian making an ass out of Christians than I do with the person who's not a Christian making an ass out of non-Christians. It's like, I don't care what they do, but there is something, if you're going to go represent our community, you better be on your best behavior. And
what do you say, John? Is she right? Should we be ambassadors for Christ on operating on all 5 cylinders and loving our neighbor as herself or go home? Is that what she's saying?
What I heard was that our primary concern would be sort of within Christianity itself.
And
in-house, cleaning up in-house.
Not cleaning up, but engaging with sort of approaches to the faith that are actually clashing, I think, with Jesus's revelation of who God is in particular, and things that sort of depart from that, and issues that have to do with that. And I think a lot of this also has to do with sort of Christian scholarship too, questions surrounding that as well. And you have a lot of bad ideas out there from certain Christian scholars. And I think we have the responsibility to critique and to correct. And sometimes we do that better than other times. Sometimes we get more snippy and irritated than other times, but we're also people. So it happens. But yeah, I think our primary concern is with Christians in particular. And I agree that with Laura that I tend to get more irritated with Christians than I do with atheists on Twitter. So yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
But it also varies depending on who happens to be the biggest jerk any week. It's a constantly the hotly contested title. So.
The biggest what?
The biggest jerk.
Oh, the biggest jerk.
Yeah.
All right, so it's been 2 hours. Are you all tuckered out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's time to make dinner, John. You hungry?
Let's do it.
So.
That sounds like an offer, John.
Yeah.
What are you guys gonna have?
The chat asked why John and I have different last names. It's like because I didn't change mine. What is?
Well, who asked that?
SJ pointed out that incorrectly that it has to do primarily with publication stuff.
Yes, that's why.
So yeah.
Oh, did you guys miss Darth Dawkins on SJ's channel today? Have you seen Darth yet? Do you guys know who that is? Speaking Christians that you're going to fight with?
I know who he is. I have negative interest in seeing him do anything ever. He seems like the most unpleasant person ever. So
he was pretty out of control.
Yikes.
He actually got mad at SJ because she wasn't helping. He got into a fight with Nathan, and then SJ was telling him, "You got to start moderating, SJ, or I'm going to leave. You got to start moderating. You got to start." And he was trying to basically work the reps. He was trying to get her to like interrupt Nathan and mute him so that it was really out of control. I mean, it happened very quickly.
What I'm not going to watch tonight.
It was entertaining. Shannon actually got in a debate with him on a modern day debate. It was pretty fun.
I only time I've seen him.
Debate with him, which was just. I saw that when I was getting to know Shannon, and
So there you have it, kids. I think it's really hard for me to I'm actually really bad at reading the questions. I think Salem
Oh
said.
yeah.
That's okay.
Usually, John, I think the biggest mistake people make is thinking, you know what, I can do this. You owe me $5, Salem. Is he still even here? I think the biggest mistake people make is thinking everybody thinks like them and have their mind, but just in a different body. Yeah. Yeah. Then Stephanie says that was awful with Darth. It was crazy. It was crazy. He was so out of control. And it was like immediately he showed up for 5 minutes and then he left in a rage because she basically wouldn't mute him so that he could talk over everybody. I mean, mute the other people so that he could talk over. So that's what happened this morning. You guys were more peaceful than that.
No, I was working on my dissertation. So
you work on.
I was working on my dissertation.
No, I meant you guys were more peaceful than that.
Oh yeah. John and I weren't screaming at each other on your channel.
Or me, you weren't screaming at me. I can't believe you said that. So you want to wrap it up? You want to say goodbye and tell us about your experience? I thought this was fun. It's nice.
I obviously I like talking to other Christians about their experiences, especially ones who don't have a party line. To be honest, I think that's a good place for Christians to come from. Is just thinking critically about their own perspective, thinking about other issues, and not having a really comprehensive agenda besides the fact that Jesus is great and it's fun to talk about him. So.
Here's what Stephanie says. I know these two don't think I like them, but I really do like them. I may disagree with some of their ideas, but I like them as good people. So that was nice.
Oh, that was nice.
And then Spartan said, who cares about that guy? He's a loser. He's talking about, I guess he's talking about Darth, or is he talking about me?
He's talking about me.
What about John?
That sounds very much like Spartan to make.
No, Spartan's a fun guy. I like Spartan. So, yeah.
Yeah, he's cool. All right, so we'll wrap it up. John, you want to say anything? You want to tie a little bow on our 2-hour engagement?
I'll tie it up the way that I've been tying it up in the last couple interviews, which is to everybody, Jesus loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life.
Amen.
Amen. There you go, kids. You heard it here live. Jesus loves you personally and has a wonderful plan for your life. And if you're going to tithe, give me the tithes. Give them to Craig Green, TCR.
You need to add that financial bit onto the end. Otherwise, it's not.
Otherwise, you aren't really being a Christian.
That's exactly right.
You know, John is kind of one of these wussy Christians who's never going to buy a jet, never going to get a jet. He's never going to go all over the world getting money and So John is not going to have a cool jet. One day I will have the cool jet.
Yeah.
We'll ride on your jet, Craig. Okay.
What?
We'll ride on.
Yeah, totally. You guys can come. That'll be fun. We'll go like bilk the suckers in Africa. I mean, preach the gospel in Africa.
Oh man!
All right, so we will wrap it up. Thanks for a fun chat. Yes, thank you all. Jesus is great, says Salem. That is true. And with that, we will close her out, kids. You heard it here live, Laura and John. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't heard it with my own 2 ears. I couldn't even believe the stuff they were saying. Couldn't even believe it. There you have it. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen. And